regardless, the NFL does have an issue with COVID in all seriousness. They have to figure it out. And this all is hitting at a time when the owners are meeting today and they're trying to figure out protocol changes with the union. It's all the product of negotiation. They ultimately want to ensure that they're going to play the games. And you also want to have integrity of your product. You don't want to have these guys just dropping like flies, even though they're fine and they're healthy. Most of them who get it, they just can't play. They aren't available. And so you have a guy who can't play in a game, and it can affect the outcome of the game. They don't want that. So, yes, you want to play all the games, but you don't want to play the games with guys you literally pull off the street the day of the game to replace the players that people are actually tuning in to watch. I know we ultimately are just rooting for the laundry, but we don't want it to be like the 1987 strike replacement games either, when all the star players for every team aren't available. So they've got to get this under control. I think it's a no-brainer to go back to last year's protocols, because last year's protocols worked. They worked. Right. You throw last year's protocols on top of the fact that 96% of the guys are vaccinated. That should be enough to hold this together, Myles.
You'd like to think so, especially because you've just not seen these kinds of numbers that are coming out of teams almost ever. I mean, even when we go back to last season and there were these kinds of clusters and sort of outbreaks that would happen between teams or on teams, it just never seemed to be this dramatic, especially where you have so many kind of star players on three different teams at the same time, all going out. It was just never really like this. And, you know, you go back to Halloween where people were probably gathering and you didn't see numbers like this. And then even in the immediate aftermath of Thanksgiving, you didn't see numbers like this. So, yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense for what now is called the intensive protocols. You probably want to implement that with every single team and start backing things off and go to virtual and try to get guys boosters as soon as possible so that you can have as much protection as humanly possible against this virus that is still out there and is still spreading throughout the communities, not just, you know, on football teams, but in society as a whole. It's still not just a football problem, it's a societal problem. But as it relates to the football, yeah, you want to get as many guys as healthy and as protected against this thing as you possibly can.
A natural solution to a supernatural problem, as Arthur Blank would say. Hey-o. And let's move forward. The NFL Players Association has played the I told you so card with the NFL today because the union was saying back in September, test vaccinated players daily. Text vaccinated players daily. Because, look, and here's the problem. The NFL came up with a set of protocols aimed at enticing as many players as possible to choose to be vaccinated. Hey, come here, step right up. If you get vaccinated, you only get tested once every 2 weeks. If you're not vaccinated, you get tested every single day. You decide. Talk among yourselves. Come to a conclusion as to what you'd like to do. Well, then what happened was they go from once every 2 weeks to once a week. That was at the urging of the union to do it every single day. And now the union's saying, hey, if we had done this every single day, we wouldn't be in this mess, because there is a logical flaw in the entire process of testing guys once a week. Because what happens is, as we've seen this week, Odell Beckham Jr. plays in a game on Monday night. He tests positive the next day. Surely he was positive during the game. TJ Watt, a couple of weeks ago, tests positive on Monday. He's negative by Friday. Surely he was positive the day before he tested positive, which was 6 days since the last time he was tested. So you can catch it, you can get it, you can spread it, and nobody knows you have it until a week after your last test. They need to go to an airlock procedure. And I thought from the get-go, when this first became a thing, what occurred to me is this is simple. You create a little booth that is attached to the front door to the facility. You go in there, you get tested, and you don't pass into the main doors unless you have tested negative. Now, the problem is, Myles, the testing technology didn't allow that starting into the 2020 season. They got there with the Mesa machine by the end of the season. The Mesa machine, where they do it on-site PCR testing, it is as reliable as when they had to send everything away to a lab. So you can do it in 15 minutes to a half hour. You bring the guy in there, have your phone. They're on their phones anyway. Listen to music, check out, read something, do whatever. Check out ProFootballTalk.com for all I care, and I do. But you don't get in until you generate a negative test. It's that simple. Regardless of whether or not you've been vaccinated, nobody gets in without a negative test. That will go a long way toward preventing the spread of the virus in facilities.
Well, absolutely, Mike. And, you know, I think that you're right. You're onto something with that, but it also really takes a while. And then part of the impetus for saying, all right, we don't necessarily want to have to test people every single day is because a lot of players and a lot of team personnel and what have you would have to get into that facility very early in order to make sure that their tests could be sent off to wherever it was that the PCR testing would then happen, and then the results would come back basically the next day overnight in certain cases, if not later that afternoon, and then that's when you find out that you're negative or positive. And so part of it is just that you don't necessarily want to always be at the facility, but when you're also testing that many players, it's also a matter of space and time. And it's like, okay, how many players can you test at a time where you're getting guys in the facility efficiently? And so I think I'm not disagreeing with you, but I think that that's part of why it is set up the way it's set up currently, right? Where it's only once a week and guys can still do what they need to do, especially if they're vaccinated. But I think it's interesting when you talk about, the gotcha aspect of this from the NFLPA, because like I was saying, it's not like we saw these huge numbers coming out of times when folks were ostensibly gathering and maybe having more parties. Like I said, with Halloween, for instance, when we were talking about Thanksgiving, initially, you didn't see this coming out of it in that next Monday or Tuesday, where teams actually were testing a little bit more frequently than because of the gathering aspect of Thanksgiving. And so now we're in basically the middle of December, and it's like, okay, things are sort of trending upwards in different communities. And I think that's part of why you're now seeing all these numbers increase within teams themselves. So, I think you're right. There is this flaw in the testing system where guys like Odell Beckham Jr., TJ Watt, were out there ostensibly positive with this virus as they were playing, but then you don't figure it out until the next day. So there it is. And don't call me Shirley.
There was a tweet the other day from, I don't know what movie that's from either. Of course I do. There was a tweet the other day from Adam Schefter suggesting that the league believes 86% of the current cases are the result of infection happening away from the facility. And at first blush, I really don't know how they get that down to the molecule, but maybe they do. And of course, they have an incentive to make it look like it's not happening at team facilities. But if that's the case, number one, they need to start working on these guys to maybe not go out and about and get themselves infected. And number two, all the more reason to come up with some sort of an airlock system. It doesn't have to be a tiny little booth. It can be a trailer. It can be big enough where you can separate. You can have 5 guys come at a time, 10 guys come at a time, whatever it is. They have the resources to figure out the best way to do this.
They do.
But a procedure, and in the teams that are playing in nice climates, you just stay outside. You hang around outside until it's time to get in. So they just need to consider doing something like that, because that's the best way to keep the virus out of the facility. You don't let anyone in every given day who is positive. No one gets in without generating a negative test. Another thing that we've been talking about, and I'm somewhat surprised and dismayed that the NFL actually seems to be listening, the idea that players who are positive and asymptomatic and obviously vaccinated shouldn't arbitrarily be kept out for any period of time. They should be allowed to play because they are playing before they test positive. They're playing the day before they generate the positive test. And see, that whole aspect of the protocol, I think, was generated for PR and or political reasons. Well, we better test them once a week. We better look like we care. When are we going to test them? We're going to test them the day of the game? No, because then we have some guys who won't play. Let's test them right after the game so maybe they can come back for the next game and they don't miss any games. So there's a lot of that logic floating around here. And if you really aren't concerned, and I don't think you should be concerned about guys who are asymptomatic and positive spreading it in an open-air stadium or in a dome that has great ventilation, why are you requiring them to be gone for a certain period of time? It's not practical in my view, and according to Mark Maskey of the Washington Post, the league has discussed allowing vaccinated players who test positive but don't have symptoms to return sooner than they already do. My position has been, unless you're symptomatic, you should be allowed in, even if you're positive and if you're vaccinated, because not in the facility per se, free reign, but on the practice field and at games, it shouldn't be an issue.
Yeah, right. And like you said, it is the testing flaw, right? Because if you have already been playing, then, you're ostensibly not necessarily shedding virus in a way that's going to get other players infected. I think that even last year before the vaccines, we sort of saw that there was no real big evidence that players were transmitting the virus to one another when they were playing. So, I mean, the only kind of questions then would be, okay, how do you necessarily get those players ready to play? How do you make sure that they're separated in enough fashion that they wouldn't necessarily be transmitting virus inside? Because I don't think you would want to have those players in a locker room setting that is indoors, right, and, in close proximity to other players. So you got to figure that out. And I think, you're talking about how the NFL has enough resources to figure out the testing problem at the facility. Well, they could certainly figure something out in terms of like a mobile locker room or putting them in a trailer or doing whatever they have to do to make sure that players can be at the stadium and not try to infect other people in an indoor setting. So I think that there is something to that, especially because, as we know, players are already playing and they're probably already positive. So, man, Mike, you're just influencing the culture here, man. I mean, my gosh, it's kind of interesting.
Well, it just shows you that, number one, they're either not as smart as they need to be, or number two, they are so desperate for solutions that they would dare to listen to someone like me. By the way, there's a press conference going on. Alan Sills, not David Sills. David Sills is somebody else altogether.
It's a musician.
Crosby Sills, I don't know. Somebody, it's not David, it's Alan Sills. Alan Sills. I don't know who
David Sills is either, but it's not.
Sills and Croft. Alan Sills speaking at a press conference today.
Breeze.
I know. They are responding to the NFLPA's position that testing should happen every day by saying that testing doesn't prevent the spread. That seems slightly illogical to me because if you know somebody has it, that would tend to put you in a position where you could prevent the spread of it. And when I hear something like that,
though.
Well, but if you're negative, right, if you don't let anyone in the door unless they've tested negative, how can you tell me that's not going to prevent or minimize the spread of it? Because I guess there's a chance that from the moment you show up for work that day to the moment you leave, you become positive and you start shedding virus. I guess that's unavoidable. But if you have a barrier to the building that is based on generating a negative test, you can't tell me that won't go a long way toward minimizing the spread. But I guess their point is It's not happening in our buildings. It's happening when these guys go home.
Exactly. So that's if you're, because it follows the logic of, when you were talking about with that Schefter tweet, right? If 86 or so % of the cases that are positive are happening from outside the building, then that's not necessarily going to prevent as much spread or prevent the clusters that are occurring inside the building anyway, because they're not coming from inside the building. They're coming from outside the building. So it kind of, more testing is not necessarily going to be the solution for that. But if you're getting clusters that are coming from inside the building itself, then yes, obviously, when you stop one, then you're going to stop that thing from entering the building in the first place.
Here's the benefit of testing every day. I remembered it now, and it's been a long time, and my memory isn't what it used to be. I freely admit it, I think. But my recollection is that at one point early in the pandemic, there was an argument made that daily testing serves as a reminder. It serves as a deterrent. It serves as a way to ensure that guys will be more careful. And for guys who are competitive and they know they're going to be tested every single day, it makes them less inclined to do things that would potentially cause them to eventually test positive, because they know first thing in the morning, I'm getting tested. So I better think twice before I go to the bar tonight. I better think twice before I go hang out at a teammate's house and three of us infect each other, which may be going on with some of these teams. You know that every day you've got that up or down accountability of whether or not you're positive or negative, and that in and of itself could be helpful. Not to reduce the spread away from the facility per se, but to infuse a mindset where you've got a report card every morning and you're not going to slip through the cracks for a week. If you're vaccinated, there's a chance you slip through the cracks, and I don't have to worry about that until next Monday. If it's immediate, if it's every day, maybe guys will be more careful.
Well, yeah, but I think the other part of it too is what are the regulations that are in the communities, right? And how do we operate within them? I mean, because when I went to Ohio for Thanksgiving, for instance, right, there's no mask mandates like there are in LA County where I live. I'm used to taking a mask with me every single place that I go, and I put that thing on whenever I have to go indoors. It's just not necessarily the case in some place like Ohio. Now, I mean, we can say whatever we want about that because you've got two teams that are in these two places that I just visited that now have upwards of 16 plus people on their COVID list. But I still think that that's part of it. Where you're in your communities, and what the regulations are, what the laws are, what the mandates are in those places, especially if that's how guys are getting this virus and testing positive, if it's coming from outside the facility. And if you're vaccinated, I mean, there is some thought there that it's not that you're invincible, not that you can't get it, because if anybody's told you that if you're vaccinated, you can't get the virus, that's wrong. It's just that the effects of what it is that you get, your symptoms are going to be more mild, and it's probably not going to send you to the ICU, right? I think that hopefully everybody who's taken a vaccine knows that. So because of that, I just feel like even with that, knowledge, you still have this more of a sense of invincibility, right? And you think, okay, I'm protected to a certain extent, and I've been trying to do the right things, and I've been abiding by everything that, the government tells me to do in my locality. Then you don't think that there's as much of a risk. So I think all that is to say that, yeah, if you now are implementing the daily testing, it sort of tells you, especially if you see what's going on in all these other teams, you're like, okay, well, maybe we got to back off a little bit, because if I test positive, it's clearly going to be a competitive disadvantage for my team as we are trying to make a push to the playoffs. And I think the more teams start thinking about that, the better off they're probably going to be.
Well, because it's going to be a team that has the full commitment, that follows those procedures, that is careful about what they do, that has strong team leadership, that holds guys accountable, like a Tom Brady, that will not have themselves in the predicament of losing key players for postseason games.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.